everybody, this is Macy.
And Rachel, and you're listening to the Farmington Public Library podcast, where we keep you in the loop of all the library happenings.
And up to date on all the books that should be on your to-read list. The following content does not reflect the views or opinions of the City of Farmington or its employees. Hi everybody, so for June's first episode, we are diving into Sarah J. Maas's House of Earth and Blood, which we've talked about the last couple of episodes. But before we get into our discussion of part 1 and part 2 of that novel, we did want to talk about what our second book for our summer book club will be, which we will be discussing starting in July. So you have about a month until that takes place. We are reading the YA novel Sadie by Courtney Summers, which we do have here at the library, and it also is on the Libby app that we utilize here with your library card membership. Sadie, like I said, it's a YA novel, but it's kind of a murder mystery novel in an unconventional way. So mark that on your calendar, and now we're ready to get into the first part of House of Earth and Blood.
So for our summer podcast episodes, we'll be doing a kind of impromptu book club, and for this section of the podcast we'll be talking about Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, and we're going to discuss part 1, which is the first 90 pages of the book. And we have a guest today, one of our other staff members. Lori is joining us.
Hello. So I will start off by saying that normally before I start reading a series, I will do some background research to understand the series better before I start reading it. Because sometimes when there's a lot of world building in the beginning, it's kind of hard for me to digest it all. I did not do that with this book, and I had to read the first bit a couple of times. Not the whole part 1, but the first part of it to kind of get into it. And I think one reason it was difficult for me to get into is because within the first chapter, there's so much new information. And I also will say, I think I'm so in the mindset of A Court of Thorn and Roses, I was really thrown off guard by how modern it is. Like,
yes.
Yeah, like they mentioned cell phones at one point, and I was like, wait, what? There's cell phones?
Well, it does get revealed in the beginning that, and it's kind of easy to miss, that it's actually Earth that this book is taking place on. It's not a fantasy world, but that it's Earth and they're humans and we have our technology, but then there's a rift somewhere and these other species come to Earth.
Okay. How did I miss all that? That is a lot. I probably just need to reread in the first
jargon at the beginning.
So
that makes a lot of sense though, because even throughout that first part, she's talking about these different realms and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm going to keep reading. So
this series, she throws a lot at you right at the beginning. It's like giving you all the information at once. And then she'll slowly start to tell the story. Whereas her other 2 series, Throne of Glass and Court of Thorn and Roses, she kind of gradually introduces the world, does the world building as the story is developing. So I think this is very overwhelming at first. But if you stick with it, it's a good story. So
even though I was confused, I do think she is still pretty good at not info dumping all the world building. Like, she still scatters it and weaves it in the story. Because I definitely have read some fantasy authors that are just like, here's all this information. But it was a lot at the beginning because you've got knowing it's on Earth, like you said now, that in my brain, you've got the whatever map she made and all of these quarters. And then you've got a list of all the houses and all the creatures and people that belong to those houses. And then there's like even notes, I think, like a footnote about the war that some of them, I guess, joined one or the other side of the war. And then you start, and then there's still more information. And I think that's overwhelming. But I think I'll slowly get into it as we go through each part.
So let's talk about Bryce.
Bryce is very different, a different kind of main character than Feyre. And I don't mean to compare them, but you can't help it.
I have to say, I do not like her.
I like how you're just like, I don't like her.
It's really hard for me to relate to her and to feel any kind of connection. It's a struggle to want to continue reading because of that.
Yeah, I could see that being
I am hoping that there's some type of character shifting thing that makes Bryce more relatable. Because right now she kind of is like someone who has newly graduated college, who has never really taken anything seriously, and they spend all their time partying.
Yeah.
You know, like she's a new intern at a law firm or something is kind of what the vibes that I have. You know,
I was getting the vibe, and this might just be a comparison to real life, like she's almost like a modern day media like socialite, because they were talking about how, I don't remember what they called her when they were doing the interrogation, but some kind of like everybody knows about her and her life and how and then what they do, and it sounds like she's notoriously a party girl like type. So I don't know what you would call that, but
yeah. Well, I know that they had nicknamed her best friend Danica Party Princess.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what that was. Yes.
I don't know. I don't like her yet, and I'm putting it on there because I'm hoping that I eventually like her. But I think it's because there's nothing. It's not even that I can't relate to her, but it's that there's nothing that's drawn me into her character yet.
To show us that she's a good person or has good redeeming qualities.
Right. And I think maybe Danica dying is supposed to be a conduit for that. Speaking of which, I was really surprised that Danica and her whole wolf pack died.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't expecting that. First of all, Danica in those 90 pages was becoming my favorite character.
That's what
okay. I was like, seriously? Are you kidding me? She was becoming my favorite. And then she's just brutally murdered along with her whole wolf pack. But the reason I was surprised by that, it's not just because I liked her. It was also because I felt like Sarah J. Maas spent so much time in those first 90 pages talking about Danica and like talking about her personality and developing her as a character.
Yes.
And then she's dead. And I'm like, what? I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
I really wasn't. But I also don't understand why they're mad at Bryce for Danica's death.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Well, she couldn't have done anything though, because she's only half fae. She's half human.
Yeah.
Isn't described as having any great powers yet. What would she have been able to do to save them?
I was wondering if it was related to, because Sabine is already doesn't like her, and maybe she's kind of influenced everybody around her. And then there was the whole thing, and I don't know if this will come up later, but how mad she was that she couldn't find Danica's sword. Sabine was yelling it about Bryce taking it, even though she didn't know.
And we still don't know what's happened with that.
Yeah.
Correct?
So I was
still in
wondering
the closet in her where she works. Yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't know if it was related to why he said she couldn't come, because Sabine's kind of the boss, I guess, of everything going on.
And I think it's pretty interesting that something was able to get into the apartment and wipe out this whole wolf pack.
Yeah.
I know who are known as the best of the best.
I mean, there was nobody beating Danica, and they killed Danica and her whole wolf pack.
And they said that the killing was so brutal in such a way that it had Danica begging like a human towards the end of it for mercy, which I feel like is important.
Yeah, now that you say that, is it like somebody who's holding more over her than was holding something else over her about that was important, or was it really her? Because she's like the coolest person on the planet, according like the most powerful, and why was she begging?
Well, and I know that they've set up to where it seems like they're blaming that person who was just recently released from prison. I don't remember
Philip Briggs.
But I feel like since that's been set up so early, that's too obvious for that to actually be who it was.
I wonder what role he'll play in the story overall.
Kind of going all the way back to Bryce, I'm hoping that losing her best friend kind of sparks
and a
some
potential
more
love interest, because she and Connor were starting to
That's true. I was
show
so
a little
bummed
interest.
about that.
The first time I've been confronted with the issue of me realizing that I prefer character building over world building if I had to pick. I would like both.
I'm the same way.
But then I was devastated that I was like forming opinions about these characters that she had talked to in the apartment, and they were wiped out immediately. And then I was like, well, I guess that's something of me as a reader that I realized was happening. I was like, oh, okay.
I'm really curious to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot we've already been told that's important, but we don't know that it's important yet. Because it's just like, what the heck just happened in this book? And I do think, too, there is going to be more to Bryce that we already know, but we don't see it yet in the sense of her history and who her real father is. We don't know that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably going to come up. And I think that's some character development that
Bryce just is too immature at this time to
the part
address.
where she's in the interrogation room and they play the recording of Danica and the pack being attacked, and she loses it, and she flips the table, and just like inhuman power that she has makes you wonder about her dad, because her mom is human,
for sure.
and you know she is half fae, but there's got to be more for the
That's true.
that the dad is gonna, and the fact that when she's chasing the demon through the streets, and she hears him and she sees him attacking the other angel, and instead of she fights, and then instead of following the demon further, she's sympathetic to the angel laying there
really
and stops
That is a
and
really
tries
good
to
point.
save his life.
That's a really
I
good
do like
point.
that about
You
her.
somehow changed my whole opinion about Bryce in 1 second. I'm like, oh yeah, I do like that.
That is a good point.
Now that everybody's dead,
Right?
except for maybe a couple characters, do you guys have a favorite so far or somebody you're more interested to find out about at least?
It was Danica was my
Right.
favorite. I established that.
She might come back in spirit,
Yeah,
literally.
we'll
I don't
see.
know.
I feel like I can't say I have a favorite yet, but the one character I'm interested to know more about is the one assassin character. A part of what was their group of 4.
Fury. Yeah.
Yeah, she just, and I think the reason why is because whenever she went to the Raven that night, I think is the name of the spot they go to meet Bryce after Bryce broke up with that guy, and she greets her by taking her by surprise by putting a knife to her neck. And I was like, interesting choice. So, yeah.
Yeah, she might be interesting.
Yeah. I just feel like there's so much I don't know about anybody
Mm-hmm.
that
I
I'm
know.
kind of interested to.
True. I think I'm curious to see where Rune's story goes, just because he kind of bursts into the scene and I don't know. I just want to see what happens, especially since he's royal and all that. I want to know more about that kind of stuff, the court stuff.
And what's the name of the other guy? The one that gave it was like an icy glare to Sabine. Hunter? Or
Hunt.
Hunt. Okay.
Hunt Athalar, I think, or something like that.
I also like Victoria. I don't have a reason. All she did was ask Bryce questions. In
yeah.
her room.
Yeah.
I just feel like I might like her eventually.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we said earlier that there's a little connection between her because she's some kind of being in this human body that she had to select, and that she's trapped in this body.
That's true.
Which kind of reminds us of Amryn in A Court of Thorn and Roses.
It also is interesting that was using a different body and cycling through. I don't know why that's interesting. I just want to know how that works. And then until she got trapped in this one. Yeah, I can't think of any kind of creature that could do that in mythology that makes sense. But it is interesting. See where that goes, hopefully.
And there is a lot of overtones in this book of, I don't know if I want to say religious aspect, but there's a lot of terminology they're angels and archangels and the eternal city. And then Hunt and Isaiah have this halo tattooed on their forehead.
Yeah, did it say they were archangels, or are they just, I don't remember if it's
They're angels, I think.
They're just a basic.
But when they were talking about their past, Hunt fought for an archangel that rebelled against the Asteria or whoever, I don't know.
It started with an M, right? Were they talking about that guy who's Micah?
Micah.
Is that what it was?
I think he works for Micah now.
Oh, Micah's who's in charge now.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of things.
I know,
I'm
it's a
sorry.
lot to keep
I know.
track of.
While I was reading, I felt like I needed to make a chart.
Yeah.
This is this person. I did not make a chart, but I felt like
I feel like that you should go for it and then share it with me.
And for any Jennifer Armentrout fans out there, when reading this first part of Crescent City, I felt like there were some terms used that she's used in her world building, because it sounded really familiar to me. So I just wonder if they borrow or it's just coincidence.
Lori and I talked a little bit about how there's so many hierarchies going on with everybody on the planet, and then within that there's the houses and the creatures, and then some of them are outcast out of their house.
I wonder if
It's a lot to
there'll
pick
be
up.
how many books there'll be in this series, because I know 3 is already out, but there's 4 houses, right? There's at least on the front on one of the first pages of Crescent
Yeah,
City,
that's
it
where
lists
the
what the
houses
houses are. There's 4. So part of me wonders if there will then be 4 books.
Maybe, yeah.
I want to know about the bone quarter, just because I know we're not talking about Court of Thorns and Roses.
Well, that's what I was going to say too. There's so many words that she uses that are in both.
Yeah.
And that's why I think so in A Court of Thorns and Roses, while they talk about falling between realms and things like that, they don't mess with it. Like, they don't do anything with it. You know, they exist in their little Feyland and
that we know of.
right. But I feel like this series is about to open up a whole thing of different realms. The things that exist in the Court of Thorns and Roses realm, it's the same elements, they just exist differently in this realm.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it's very similar, like, let's think about it. Different religions or different mythology, they all have very similar elements. They all are just slightly different. You know, so, and I think that that's comparable.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. That's what I'm putting my vote down as.
Well, there's already a character that's similar to a character from the other series, and when you talk about Amarin, hopefully not a spoiler, but when you talk about Amarin coming from, she isn't necessarily from that world.
Right.
So it's
Right.
interesting.
So you know
She
that
got,
there's
like,
So you know
worlds
that
out
there's
there,
other
yeah.
worlds out there,
Yeah.
and then having somebody in this one already who has a kind of similar being tied to a body, that's interesting and probably potentially related. So
And there's an autumn court
Yeah.
Yes.
in both worlds.
Yeah.
which I'm excited about.
Of course. Yeah, that checks out. That checks out.
Hey, if I don't say Lucian at least once, he's the best character ever. So Bryce is sailing now, like a solo sailing. I was a little bit lost in that.
I feel like, from what I gathered, since she's not allowed to attend the funeral of the Wolfpack, she wants to say goodbye to Danica in her own way. And I feel like it has something, the funeral takes place at like a riverside or something, and very simplified.
I think they did explain it. It's like really hard to remember, but they sail a boat, an empty boat out, or with their remains or whatever out, and then if they're worthy to land on the other side, they do. If the gods decide they're not, they tip the boat over and they sink.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
And so she was not invited to attend that. But she does do something at the river, and it ends with her going to meet maybe that god or something on the other side.
Okay, because I was like, maybe she's like somehow
Right.
kind of trying to be a part of the
That's
funeral
what I'm
without
saying.
being,
That's what I'm saying, that I think that she's doing her own sailing thing to say goodbye to her best friend, which just ripped me in two, but whatever.
I know,
That always gets me. It's the sibling stuff and the best friend stuff that just, bam, gets
It's
me.
very sad. And then I'm just curious to see at the end of this, because sometimes when there's a book in parts, you don't know where it's going to pick up. So I don't know if it's going to be like during this sailing or like later or a week later. You don't know.
I hope they explain it so that we know what she's doing and what she was trying to do something. She was trying to meet with somebody or something, you know.
I have no predictions for part 2 because I don't know.
I felt like she was trying to meet with Danica's spirit.
Yeah.
Because I'm willing to bet that Danica was deemed worthy, her and her wolf pack were deemed worthy, but I could be wrong. And so part of me thinks that she's meeting Danica's spirit, because it felt very underworld vibes type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
me,
sailing
in that
on
last
the-
part.
the river. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a good prediction. I don't have any idea. I just hope I like Bryce in part 2, and part 2 is really big. So
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be character development.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope so. I think maybe one reason is just it seems so difficult to relate is because all we saw her doing in part 1 was partying. That's it.
yeah, I'm looking forward to part 2 though. Hey everybody, it's Rachel here. Just wanted to take a quick break between our book discussions for today to let you know about our dinner, dessert, and a movie bundle service at the library. If you don't already know, this program is always available and you can visit our website or the library in person to fill out a small survey about the types of food recipes you might be looking for or cookbooks, and maybe some of the movies you like. And a staff member will create a specially curated bundle just for you based on your answers. During the summer, we're running a special contest where anytime between now and August, if you sign up to receive a dinner bundle, you will also get instructions into a foodie contest where you make one of the recipes that is included in your bundle and take a photo of the recipe next to the dish you've made. After you take a photo, send your photo in to the email address located on your survey, and you'll be eligible to win our prize of a grilling cookbook and burger press. All photos must be submitted by August, and all participants must be 16 years or older to participate and have a library card.
Okay, so today is the, second part of our summer book club discussion segment that we're doing.
Yes.
And so if the last time we did this, we are reading House of Earth and Blood, the first book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. And we did part 1, which was pages 1 through 90. And then we're discussing part 2 today, which is I don't remember what chapter it starts at, but I know that it ends at chapter 38. So it's a good chunk of the book.
Yeah, it's a pretty big part.
And I think before we get too deep into the discussion, and so where we're at, and tell me if I'm missing anything, but so basically we have the main character, Bryce, who has, in part 1, she lost her best friend. Her best friend was murdered. And then we fast forward 2 years, and she still hasn't moved on from her best friend's death. Her life, it kind of is the same, but it also looks very different at the same time, which as you read the book, you'll see why that's true. But so basically, Bryce in part 2 has kind of been charged to investigate the murder of Danica because similar murders have been happening now, 2 years later, and somehow Bryce is connected to everybody. And so that's kind of where part 2 takes off, and then it goes from there.
That was a really good summary.
Thank you. I tried.
It was like perfect amount of information.
Not to dominate the conversation, but the first thing I have on my list is that Sabine, Danica's mom, is the worst. That's literally what I have underlined here.
I agree.
So,
and she's only popped up a couple times in part 2, but every time is like really, really aggressive.
Yeah. And something I want to talk about with Sabine is something that has come up in part 2. Is if you remember in part 1, Bryce's boss asked her the week of Danica's death, prior to her death happening, to investigate the missing horn from one of the temples in the city. And I don't remember the significance of the horn, but it's just an artifact to the Fae people of some kind. That happens in part 1. It doesn't come up again. Well, lo and behold, it comes up in part 2. But they've never been able to figure out who stole the horn because there was a blackout in the city during that time, so you can't see anything off of the security cameras throughout the city, yada, yada, yada. Well, part 2 ends with it being revealed that Sabine, Danica's mother, is the individual who switched the security tapes.
Yes.
So there's actually no security tape for the blackout in front of the temple where this artifact was stolen, which at this point in the story is this artifact being stolen seems to be the center of why all these murders, including Danica's and her pack, have been happening.
Right. I mean, and also the horn, we know in part 2 that Rune is looking for it also. And he gets a lot, talks about it a little bit. His father kind of makes him, investigate that. So it's kind of this other side plot. But also in that last section, we find out that the reason that's even important is because Danica was guarding it during that time, which she never does guard before. So that's just like a whole, kind of a cliffhanger for part 2.
Right. Well, and the question I have about Sabine, aside from her literally being the worst, which is what I have written down on this piece of paper, is do we actually think that she plotted to kill Danica, though?
You know what? I don't know enough about her character, but she doesn't strike me as very intelligent. I don't know. She just seems like someone who wouldn't have that much forethought to plan out all of these things. She does strike me as somebody who would take advantage of an opportunity with the tapes, maybe, but I don't know if she's involved in the whole plot necessarily, if that makes sense. At least that's what I think so far. What do you feel like?
Well, so what I think, I don't like Sabine, and I think that she had a lot of motivation to kill Danica.
Right.
And we find that out before Danica dies, that there's a lot of animosity there.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't make sense to me why she would kill Danica for that reason. Because Danica wasn't stationed at that temple by chance. If I'm understanding the books correctly, Sabine is the one that would give out the orders of where the pack would be stationed.
Yeah, and Bryce even said she would change it up on purpose to mess up Danica, just to be,
to annoy her, and to inconvenience her. So, if Sabine wanted to steal that artifact, why would she have stationed Danica there than just to kill her? That doesn't make sense, because even though I don't think that Sabine cared for her daughter, I just don't have a feeling that she plotted to get her killed.
I don't think so either, but I honestly just don't think she's smart enough to even plan something that elaborate out.
However, it doesn't take away from the fact that she is the one that switched to security footage.
Yes.
So why did she do that?
I think there's definitely something. That's what I'm saying. I think she had an opportunity to do something and she took it. Or maybe somebody told her to. And she hates Danica enough that, why not?
Right. So. And so I've read a little bit ahead into part 3. So before I say this, I can't remember if this is in part 2 or part 3. Have they in part 2, do they visit Philip Briggs?
Yeah, that was in part 2.
So what did you think of him talking about Danica going easy on him and his people? That was kind of a big thing.
Yeah, that was a little surprising. I didn't even think about it too much after he said it, because I was just like listening. He also seemed to know, I feel like he knew about who Bryce was, which was a little bit, I think she was caught off guard too, I believe, if I'm remembering right. So I'm not really sure. I feel like there's so many little pieces on a chessboard in part 2 that are like moving slowly, but also when you put it all together, it's so much stuff that my brain can't put it all together yet. I'm not really sure what to think.
Yeah.
Could be, if he's like this criminal mastermind, he could just be saying that to give Bryce a hard time with it, because that seems like something you would say, like a maybe not normal person would say, to try to trip up
that's
an
true.
Investigation. If he wants to throw a wrench in the investigation, he can do that.
That's true.
Nobody's the people who would argue that he's wrong are obviously dead, so like whatever for him.
So another thing I had on my list was where we're at with all the killings that are happening. Up to this point, I feel like it's being assumed that all the killings have been about people who were present that the night that the horn was stolen.
Right.
However, in my opinion, I feel like it may actually be more linked to Bryce than what we know. Because I think it would be remiss to forget how at the beginning of the book, the killings were first linked to Bryce. Obviously, she was a suspect, and I don't mean in like a suspect way.
Right.
But I mean that I don't think that the people being killed are just people who were present the night that the artifact was stolen. I think that it may be linked to Bryce having a part in it. There is something to be said about wherever Bryce goes, someone ends up dead.
Do you think it's related to, and this literally just popped into my head, so if this doesn't make sense, that's why. So one of the biggest questions I have about part 2 is like the flashbacks of her and Danica. And they happen a couple different times where Danica tells Bryce she loves her.
Yes.
And they're being like held up, and Bryce tells Danica to close her eyes.
Right.
So that could be a lot of things, but I wonder if Bryce is hiding her power.
Yeah.
And the person knows that.
Yeah.
And maybe is trying to get her to use it.
Oh, that's good.
I don't know.
It could be that.
Just like, because one of my questions that I didn't write down but had in my brain for today was like, what was going on with those flashbacks?
Right.
Like, what was happening?
Right.
And what did Bryce do?
Yeah.
I definitely think Bryce's power is significant for most of that.
Well, and I also think, too, something else that kind of implies that was the Oracle's warning to Hunt to
Right.
stay away from Bryce Quinlan.
Yeah, the Oracle. It was interesting.
Yeah.
And the rumor that she lost her vision for a week, like what?
Yeah.
Um,
What did she see
yeah.
that was so...
So the only theory I have, because I like to make theories, is that I'm wondering if she has starlight power that's really bright, and maybe it flashed. She's just like very powerful in the line for her father's power, and partially because Bruins is so weak, and they bring it up a lot, and then her losing her vision. I was like, that's interesting. That what could cause that. So yeah.
Yeah, and here's the thing. So, if I understand this correctly, Rune gets his starlight power from his mom's side,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, no. I think he gets his shadow power from his mom's side. Did I misremember that?
Well, maybe I didn't. Well, I thought the starlight and shadow went hand in hand.
Oh, maybe. He said something at one point about being a shadow walker, like his mom or something, I thought. But maybe we both need to, revisit
Maybe.
that.
Because there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, so this is what I think. I completely agree with you. I think it's definitely something about Bryce's power. And I think something about Bryce's power also relates to the prophecy that the Oracle gave Rune about the bloodline ending with him.
It's true.
But
She also has a couple times, which is why another thing I think that makes me think that this person's doing stuff on purpose is her anger is really odd. Bryce gets so angry that she's almost there's no rational thought, it seems, behind her anger episodes. Nothing else matters. She's just really angry in those moments.
and she can't control
And
it.
she doesn't seem to be controlling it or trying to. And it's just a little bit surprising because in most of her aspects of her life, she seems to be in control of the situation or what's happening. The pushing is for that so that she will use her power, but I'm not sure. Because in the moment with whatever happened with Danica in the flashbacks, she used it, and somebody knows that, it seems like, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out how to get her to do it again.
Danica, I think at the time of that incident, not that we have a lot of information about it, but the incident at the center of that flashback, I would assume that Danica still had the abilities that she had when she died. So what type of ability does Bryce possess that she was the one that got them out of that incident and not Danica?
Right.
You know what I'm
Something pretty
saying?
big that
Yeah.
I would assume could take out multiple people at once.
And something I'm seeing in this book is that I'm catching more similarities between her world building and Greek mythology in this book. One, and I said this last time we talked about it, was at the end of part 1 with how Bryce was making that trip in the river, that very much visit Danica, which we never find out what happens with that. Very much so reminded me of the underworld and how in Greek mythology to actually get to the underworld to speak to the dead, which no one would do, but if you were going to do that, you had to sail across the river Styx or Styx, however you say that. That reminded me of that. Also, the drop reminds me a lot of how in Greek mythology, if someone wanted immortality, but it was more not guaranteed to be immortal, but being invincible, the whole Achilles heel statement was that you had to drop into the river. You had to jump into the river Styx or Styx, however you say it. I don't know how you say it. And it's supposed to burn you alive, but you have to think of one thing that anchors you, which is where eventually your Achilles heel would be, which would be the one spot that could kill you. But that vaguely reminds me of the drop of jumping into something to gain immortality, but having someone anchor you to the other side to pull you back up,
That's
figuratively.
true. That makes sense.
That really reminds me of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And the oracle. That is also a very Greek myth
Right.
type thing.
Well, I thought there were words, and I could be wrong, where like they kept talking about Midgard, which I think is Norse. And there's a couple other things that I'm not remembering right off the top of my head, but there's a lot of
She
mixing
also
of
includes-
mythologies.
And
yeah.
she includes Latin,
Yeah.
too, in this book. I'm also curious to circle back to episode 1, and we talked about Bryce and kind of the unlikability of her as the main character. What are your thoughts now that you have finished part 2?
I won't say I didn't like her. I just thought I would connect with her maybe more than I did, and I didn't really feel like that. I still feel a little bit like she's probably not my favorite character ever, and that's okay. I think it's I think she's still interesting, and I like that in part 2 she's kind of using her party girl image as a facade for pretty much. I was wondering if that was something she was even doing in part 1 and nobody really knew, or if she was, because she was still at the club and stuff, and maybe she uses that so people underestimate her intentionally. I feel like, because
It's her armor, kind of.
Yeah, I would say that. And it's become more so since Danica's murder. So she isn't my favorite character in the story, but I do like her. I like the dynamics between her and Hunt are interesting. I kind of feel like
They're wild.
they're kind of funny, and you never really know what they're gonna. I don't know how their interactions are gonna go. I feel like they're all over the place, but it's still interesting. And him being the first person, kind of, I feel like, to really observe her is throwing her off, because I mean, he knows now that she's faking drinking, first of all, which is interesting. So I don't know. How do you feel about Bryce?
I feel for her a lot more than I did in part 1. And I think this whole time she has been smarter than I gave her credit for.
Yeah.
In the sense of, I think a lot of her things that I found difficult to relate to, she has done intentionally to protect herself. So she won't be taken advantage of or used, or that she won't be thought of as a weapon that anyone can use either for their own disposal.
That's true too.
In part 1, she says that something that she was never jealous about in regards to Danica was the level of the responsibility she had, and that people saw her as a weapon to be used, or something of that lingo. And I think that she doesn't want that for herself, because she doesn't want to be anything that anyone can claim to own. And so I think that kind of has gone into the whole party girl facade that she has going on. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Bryce loves to dance and that she does like to drink and all of that. But I think that she has played it up.
Right, that's what I mean. Pretty similar, I think, thoughts on that.
And she has guts. Let's
True.
just put that out there. She's gutsy.
Yeah, there's a lot of times she definitely does that. Can we, not to change anything, talk about some of the other characters maybe for a minute? I don't even know where to start with everybody else, but there's so much going on in part 2 that...
Well, let's start. Who's your favorite character in part 2?
That's hard. I kind of like Rune the most. But Lahava is slowly stealing my... I don't know. I laugh every time she's in it, to be honest.
Yeah, I like her.
I think I like Rune because I feel like I think he really cares about Bryce a lot, and you can tell every time they talk to each other how much he wants to repair their relationship.
Obviously, Bryce, Hunt, and Rune are our main characters that we have going on.
Yeah.
Who I think are going to continue to be in the storyline. Is there anybody else in the story that you think is going to end up playing a bigger part?
I don't know about the other characters' roles or anything, but I think it's entirely possible that Micah is more involved with whatever's happening than he is showing everybody. And the fact that we find out in part 2 that he's the one that Bryce saved outside.
Yeah. Which is wild. I have suspicions about that.
Yeah, that's part of why I'm so suspicious of him, because, like, what was he doing out there? Also, the demon that attacked them, I was like, is it possible that he unleashed it himself and it turned on him? And that's why he was attacked. Like, it's really convenient that he was the one out there that she had saved.
So, if you think that he was the one that unleashed the demon, do you think it was for the purpose of killing Danica and her pack? And if so, why would Micah have been targeting them?
I still think that ties all back to Bryce. But I do want to go back to the horn for a second, because we haven't really talked about the fact that it has such specific repair instructions that don't even exist, as Ruin keeps saying, that just means you can't repair it. So I think it's possible that the horn is tied to Bryce's power, and the reason that she's like your theory about her being part of the murder and being the target for the killings, and then the horn being missing both maybe involve Bryce.
Is that the whole reason why someone could want to repair the horn would be to open the different realms?
Right, yeah.
Which is a really big thing, which supports all of our theories about these worlds kind of being the same but existing in different realms and just being a different version of each other.
What do you think would be the purpose of somebody wanting to open all the realms?
To gain more support for whatever cause they have, whether it be good or bad.
I think that's entirely possible and probably a pretty good guess. Anything else you want to talk about before?
I don't think so. I feel like I've exhausted all my theories.
I know, sorry, I talked a lot.
No, well, as did I. So,
all right. Do you have a favorite character at all besides, though, before we leave? Because I just need to know.
Yeah, favorite character. So far, I like, what's her face? Jessica, or have you said that? The witch?
Oh, yeah.
Or the sorcerer, excuse me.
She's kind of funny. She has a really uncanny, ability to pop in.
Yeah, I like her.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see why she defected from being a witch.
Yeah.
And I think she's going to come up more in the story. At least I hope she does. I like her.
I know we're not seeing her, but I want her in person in the scene for once, instead of just calling Bryce and being like, hey.
Yeah. I really liked her interaction with Micah, how she was so unbothered and did not regard him as the super hierarchy person. And so I like her. I mean, I'm still mourning over Danica. Let's be honest.
That's fair.
So,
yeah.
But yeah.
Lahaba is great. She might become my favorite, even though she probably won't be in every scene.
I like her too. Anyway, I think that kind of wraps up all of our thoughts for this second part of House of Earth and Blood. Let us know what your thoughts are.
Join us in the next episode for parts 3 and 4. If you're hearing this message, you listened to the whole episode.
What we really should say is thank you for listening, but as much as we love having listeners, we would love it even more if we saw you at the library.
For questions, call us at 573-756-5779.